Well, we're a little early. Any questions? Any news? We are going to have some visitors come back in, but we won't embarrass them by pointing them out. They've had we got a few minutes, in some places the church wants to welcome visitors, so they want to have folks wear "I'm a visitor" sign, and then other folks say, well, that's not very nice because that embarrasses them, makes them feel awkward. Oh, you know how those work. Cool. All right. Thank you, Greg. Well, that's one of the things I've tried to teach my boys. You don't have to have the greatest brain power to be smart. One of the basic ways to be intelligent is simply be observant. Just pay attention. See how things work. And then you can make improvements and make things work properly and not be frustrated with things not working. Yeah, it's just a matter of screwing it in. There you go. See? It doesn't wobble or anything. Okie dokes. Well, we got to the point where we can move on to new stuff, and we get to the point of chapter 4, and this is right after the being expelled from the Garden of Eden, and the cherubim there with a flaming sword, and turning so that he's guarding the gateway or the opening to get back to the Garden of Eden, so they can't eat from the tree of life and so forth. So from that point, the story moves on and says, "Now the man knew his wife Eve, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I have produced a man with the help of the Lord. Next she bore his brother Abel. Now Abel was a keeper of sheep, and Cain a tiller of the ground. In the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground. And Abel, for his part, brought of the firstlings of his flock, their fat portions. And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain and his offering he had no regard. So Cain was very angry, and his countenance fell. The Lord said to Cain, Why are you angry? And why has your countenance fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is lurking at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must master it. Well, Cain said to his brother Abel, Let us go out into the field. And when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. And then the Lord said to Cain, Where is your brother Abel? And he said, I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper? And the Lord said, What have you done? Listen, your brother's blood is crying out to me from the ground, and now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you till the ground, it will no longer yield to you its strength, and you will be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth. Cain said to the Lord, "My punishment is greater than I can bear. Today you have driven me away from the soil, and I shall be hidden from your face. I shall be a fugitive and wander on the earth, and anyone who meets me will kill me." Then the Lord said to him, "Not so. Whoever kills Cain will suffer a sevenfold vengeance." And the Lord put a mark on Cain so that no one who came upon him would kill him. And then Cain went away from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. We're going to end there for today. So, what does this story have to tell us? Just like the last chapter, lots of stuff is hidden in this story. But we'll try to work our way through it. Now the man knew his wife. Those first verses we understand to be a euphemism for they had sexual intercourse and conceived of a child. But Von Rad said this made an interesting point, that we do not hear about sex until after they're outside of paradise. I don't know what that means. They don't comment on it, but it's an interesting observation that Von Rad makes. It also reminds me of the promise to the radical Muslims that if they will go out and do these suicide bombings, then they will be rewarded with 77 virgins or something. Well, if that's in paradise, where there isn't any sex, so the virgins stay virgin forever. And it seems like punishment to be sent there with these beautiful virgins, and you just have to hands off. You can look but don't touch. Doesn't seem like a very good reward. But there must be a bunch of dummies that don't think through that. But anyway, the concept of producing the generations that take off, they also say that what comes next has been inserted into the story. Now the man knew his wife Eve, and she conceived and bore Cain. And then next she bore his brother Abel. But then in 17, it picks up where I stopped. Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch, and he built a city and named it Enoch after his son Enoch. And to Enoch was born Irad, and Irad was the father of Mehujael. And anyway, it goes on with a genealogy there, and saying that this story of the first murder or homicide is slipped in to, yes. That's a good question. Where did Cain's wife come from? Next door. Actually, this story presumes that there is, where it picks up, makes the assumption that there is society, there are communities, there's other things that exist. Yahwist, who's writing this story, has theological messages to get across, but he's using material, already existing stories that are already floating around, and he adapts them in order to carry his message. Now, those stories have elements in them that are anachronistic to this first family of the very beginning. For example, that Abel is a shepherd and brings the fatling, the first fruit, or the first offspring from the flock. Well, that's presuming animal sacrifice. In animal sacrifice, the fat is put upon the altar and it burns up, and that's how you get the offering up to God, this wonderful aroma. You know how when your neighbors are cooking steaks and it just kind of migrates and it smells so good? Well, it's in the air. So the reason the fat and the guts and so forth are offered to God is because in the sacrifice, so often the people would eat the meat. It would be a feast with the understanding that it's a fellowship dinner and God is present. And so it's like our communion, Christ is present. This whole idea of the meal is a meeting with the God, and everybody participates. Well, we haven't gotten to the point where human beings are no longer vegetarians. So that is an anachronism that is kind of pulled in and carried with the story, and the story has a different point. So anyway, Adam knew or experienced his wife, and it's just a part of that expression we've come to understand. Also makes the point of, and I don't know, I mean, different ones commenting on this pick up different things. Make a big point, I have produced a man with the help of the Lord. And this produced or acquired is a word that's not really ever used in terms of birthing other places. And that seems a little odd to the biblical scholars who really analyze the Hebrew texts and so forth. And that and he uses the Issa, the word for man, which is really kind of strange because it's a baby boy. It's not a full-grown man. And then with the help of the Lord. Now, on one hand, this could be a sense of humbleness and a woman's sense of fulfillment, of cooperating with God and in the creative process. A word of affirmation, of closeness and cooperation with God, but then it could also be interpreted as a part of the arrogance of trying to be like God, equal to God. God is a creator, I'm a creator too. We're not real sure what is meant there, but anyway, one of that co-creative things, I haven't experienced it, but I've read it from some female theologians and devotional writers have expressed that process of giving birth, even though it's difficult, it's labor, that when the female body goes into labor, that's not a choice. That's not a conscious decision. It's kind of like nature, and God's creative processes have started. And you can fight it or you can cooperate with it. Learn to cooperate with the process. And for some women, that is a very spiritual experience. It's a powerful sense of oneness with God and with all of nature. Anybody? Yes, no? Okay, yes, okay. Some people, it's hell, you know. Give me the painkiller. Give me an epidural, please, hurry, quick. Anyway, but next she bore brother Abel, and now Abel was a keeper of sheep and Cain the tiller of the ground. In those processes, the word Cain, in the Hebrew, it kind of sounds like this gain or acquire, and so partly the story seems to be picking up on that alliterism that's in the storytelling mode of pre-literary times, but also the word has some reference to spear, which may, spear is a weapon used in war to kill, so that may be part of it. And also later it tells us Cain was, and his descendants are involved in metallurgy. They're working with metals. So it may have all kinds of connections there of why that name was given. And then Abel, the Hebrew, a common name, a noun, just means puff or vanity, like in Ecclesiastes, all is vanity, vanity. And you think, well, why would they name him that? Well, one commentator said the shepherds are always losing out against the farmers who claim the land and take it over and fence it off. And so that might be an idea or reference there, picking up of why was there this enmity between the two brothers. It's just an etiology story about the farmer and the rancher conflict for ever and ever. But another thought was that since he will die soon, the whole effort of giving birth and raising him, and then he's killed as a young man, it's all that was in vain. It was maybe that's the thought of why that name gets there. Then the resented, literally his anger was kindled. And then the mark on the forehead, it's usually a protective sign in those times, and the land of Nod was wandering. But those are some things when we get to them. But it's interesting, both offer a sacrifice. There's no explanation or reason that they offer the sacrifice. As yet, there's, in the storyline, there's no organized religion. There's no altar having been built. There's no church or synagogue. There is no priesthood to organize the sacrifices and the religious customs or rules. Nothing is there that's required or asked of them to do it. And since crops grew and produced a harvest and the flocks reproduced, we would assume that one of the things here is this is just a spontaneous thank offering. And no indication here of some sense of wanting to, sometimes offerings are trying to buy insurance. If we offer the sacrifice, then God will protect us or bring the rains or keep us alive in some way if we offer sacrifices. So it's kind of an insurance policy dynamic there, but that's not there. Or an offering is, I need something special. And so the offering can be a bribe as the inner workings there. Von Rad mentions cultures develop religious practices, and religious cults, that is the temple and altars and priesthood and festivals and rules and so forth, come from culture But the start point here is that in this, they don't have a culture yet, and so each independently has decided to offer something to God. They're not working together. You know, they didn't say, let's have a party, or let's come together. There's no conversation between the two brothers to say, well, let's worship God because things are going great for us. It's two separate events, and something within their personalities, their nature, that they decide to worship separately but differently. And God honors one but not the other. And why? Anybody know why? This is always because of his evil attitude. It doesn't tell us. We'd have to presume that. The text doesn't tell us. So there's a lot of reading into this as we try to come up with some explanation. A lot of folks, in trying to read into it, will say that Cain offers some, where Abel offers the best, the firstlings. But some are saying and argue that it's because it has nothing to do with the offering or the attitude of the one offering. It's a story saying God likes the shepherds better. God doesn't like the farmers. And actually, it's not really in this story, or doesn't seem to be the agenda of the Yahwist. However, what happens when folks start claiming the land and doing agriculture develops some things in culture and society that leads to war and killing. And that is that the best land is claimed by the more powerful. And if they want and need more land, then they take it. And then those who produce well and have stock saved up and stored, then those who don't do well but are hungry then come and attack and try to take the food. And then another thing with the subjugation of women, when you have an agricultural society and the man doesn't treat the woman well, she cannot pick up her half of the property and put it in a knapsack and go away and start over. Hunter-gatherer, she can leave and she can survive. But in agriculture, she's bound to the land. And so that process really put woman in a much more vulnerable position because of the nature of the economy and the processes. But anyway, those arguments are made that the Yahwist is trying to make that point that God loves the shepherd more because the Hebrew people tended to be more agrarian and migratory at some points in their history. But anyway, Von Rad really lays it at God's feet and says, there is no real reason. There's nothing better or worse about Cain or Abel or the offering. It's kind of up to God, and God is could be kind of capricious. It's just what God likes better. You know, we've heard that in families, parents don't have favorites, but yet when the parent dies, sometimes there's conflict between the children, and some will say, they always loved you more than me. Yeah. It can be. However, sometimes it isn't a love more than the other. Sometimes it's just personalities click a little better. You just enjoy the same things. You get along better. And so you've got a closer bond, but it doesn't mean necessarily that you love one more than other. Sometimes when you've got two children, and this and this has come out in the wills, one child is bright and talented and successful and makes lots of money. Another child has some kind of problem or difficulty. It may be, some kind of psychosis, or it may be a learning difficulty or something, and they're always going to need some help. So, in the will, successful child doesn't need anything. Other child is going to need a lot. So this one gets a few mementos, and the one that's needy gets the bulk of the financial support. And so if the one who does well is not very understanding and say, I worked so hard and I achieved and I did all of this, and what's the reward? It's a slap in the face. I've heard of that happening and some of those reactions. But sometimes that one child seems to be loved more because that child has greater needs. But is it loved more, or just the situation requires more time and effort and attention? Anyway, Von Rad says the Yahwist wants to show that it is God's choice and it's not based on the merit of the worshiper, and that we always need to be aware that God is in control, we are not. It gets to, in the New Testament, where we deal with grace, we don't earn grace. It isn't that we can make ourselves more deserving of God's love and favor by being so good that we get to the point of the arrogance, I deserve and I demand God's blessings and reward in my life. When something good happens, a lot of times people don't say, why me? When something bad happens, they say, why me? So the whole concept of God's grace and how God cares about us is really beginning to be developed here, and wrestle with that question. But anyway, we do have the existence of other people and cultures in the society. One is the wife of Cain. The other is, why does he need a mark to protect him from other people who might kill him if there aren't any other people out there? So the assumption is there are other people out there. Another part of the Cain and Abel story is Cain is related to the Kenites, another tribe that was always around in the area of the Israelites, and they never were close kin, and they never became a part of the Hebrew faith and worshipped God, or didn't become a part of the covenant. But they were close, and they were smiths or tinkers, metallurgy. Cain equals spear. Now, there were superstitions about smiths. They were a pariah in society, like gypsies, and they were always nomadic. They never really settled, and there were thoughts that there were powers of good and evil associated with metals and working with metals. There may have been some that worked with metals, and like if you worked with lead a lot, then all of a sudden, your body absorbs that and you get real sick and die. And so it could be associated with something evil. But we also have, it carries on into that metals can be used for good or evil. It can either make the plow or the sword, beat our spears into plows, and so forth. Or also the good and evil part, we have lucky coins and horseshoes, turn them right side, upside down, and so forth. Anyway, and again, the animosity of farmer and shepherd may have been a conflict story of the origin of the story that the Yahweh adapts and takes somewhere else. And he carries his message. Now, the alienation of man from God, this fratricide, I mean, he didn't just kill his brother. It was an alienation against God. It was an assault on another human being, equals an assault on God in that it goes against God's rule and God's will for people, but also it's an idea that the divine image is in each person, and if we kill that, we're doing something bad to the divine image. And so let's see. So they brought offerings. This is in the course of time. And I can't remember which one, Von Rod, I think, said in the course of time may mean and be an indication that a part of the story has been left out, and they kept this in course of time. They've been describing some other things that are happening, and then when they get to move on, this is a transition expression. And in the course of time, because they've been talking about this other stuff, things have been developing in the course of time, then they bring these offerings. The big point that this will lead to later on in the Bible is this conflict between brothers. God often choosing the younger over the other, over the older brother, or like the Joseph story, all the brothers, try to do away with him, but then he becomes God's special and chosen one. This is a recurring theme throughout the story of the people of Israel. And so right here, right at the first, we get that theme introduced. And there's no special reason why. It just, the two hadn't really done anything to separate or distinguish themselves when God accepts one offering over the other. There's no explanation for the why, but that for some reason God chooses one and prefers one and gives attention to one and not the others. Now, there is a custom in the culture and in many cultures, the primogeniture issue of who inherits, well, the oldest son. And so the oldest son automatically has power and authority and responsibility and so forth, and the younger children don't. They've got to make it some other way. But God choosing a younger seems to be a countercultural issue that maybe somehow is making some sort of statement, but since they don't spell it out, we're not real sure what it is, but there is something there. So, to pick up on Cain being crestfallen or pouting, his face fell, he's dejected and sad. It's real interesting that the ancients seem to be well aware of something that we're having trouble understanding and dealing with even today. But the ancients were aware that anger is a secondary emotion. there's always a primary feeling that comes first. Anger and rage are not instantaneous. Something happens first. There is hurt, there is fear, there's disappointment, there's a boundary invasion. You're in my space, or you're doing my job. There's some kind of jealousy or a frustration. Something's not working, it's not working. It grows, it moves from something happening first to the anger. And in human relationships, if we can identify that before it spills over into anger, then we can make choices and avoid angry words or violence that then makes it worse and creates problems for us. But in our animal nature, we start getting physiological things going off even before our brain gets to the frontal lobe and starts telling us that something's going on and so forth, because there are things that we, for our survival, need to be ready for the self-defense, the fight or flight syndrome when we are threatened. Our life is threatened. In order to protect ourselves, we need that rush of adrenaline. We need the heart rate to come up if we're going to get away, to run away, or if we're going to fight and defend ourselves. But in human relationships, a lot of times it's not our body that is threatened in our actual life, but our ego, our sense of well-being, our sense of worth is sometimes or often challenged or threatened, and we get those same physiological, we start to get irritated or hurt, and so those things start processing in us as human beings. We know, or you may know, most of us know, children in daycare nowadays and preschool are taught in getting along with each other. Anybody know the phrase? Use your words. Use your words. Don't hit the other kid. Don't go take your toy back and fight and have a tug of war and fall on the floor and strike each other and cause blood to flow. Use your words is what they're taught, and how to deal with their frustrations and their boundary invasions and their hurts. So, in the story, the demon is lurking or crouching at the door. The expression in the Hebrew says that it's a little awkward. Sin is a feminine word in the Hebrew language, and the personification of the demon is a masculine word, and it's identified with a word in the Assyrian sources. But in that language and in those times, demons hadn't grown and developed into the Satan and the devil. They were just kind of spirits. The people felt and experienced spirits, and sometimes they were evil spirits, and sometimes they were good spirits that helped them. But anyway, the idea is that, and again, it's using the language to get something outside so they can talk about it, but it's really dealing with the internal processes of the heart and mind. So, like the snake talking to the woman. But this internal process is dealing with one's self, that one makes the decision to act out on the feelings, and so hopefully one can let reason in to bring the feelings under control in order to make the appropriate decision of how to deal with that. And this idea of lying at wait at the door means to plot one's harm. So it's a warning that if you give in to that, it's going to hurt you. It's going to have bad results. And so God is warning Cain that going with the negative feelings will lead to bad consequences for him. But he's reminded, you have the freedom and power to control the feelings. Make a better choice and channel those negative feelings in a different way. Now, I didn't make time to go look it up. Paul says to love your enemies and do good to them, and thereby you will cast burning coals upon their heads. Anybody remember that? Where is that? I've got it marked, but I didn't go back and look it up. But anyway, it's there. And I used that one. That is one of my favorite scripture lessons because I'm a human being, and there are situations and people who have wronged me and hurt me and frustrated me, and I have felt like striking back in some way, getting even. But in my process of trying to be a good person, one of the things that I do is I will imagine and I will think of all the mean and nasty things I could do to them. But I don't. And I tell myself, I'm a better person than that. I'm not the kind of person that will do those mean and nasty, awful things, even though that person did something unkind to me. So I try to maintain that, but there's the other side. If you're engaged in some kind of relationship and somehow this person doesn't like you for some reason, and they're being unkind to you because they don't like you for whatever that reason is they have, if you respond in some negative way, that will only justify them in their attitude of not liking you, because they say, you don't deserve to be liked. Look how you behave. But yet if you act kindly, do kind things to them, you will frustrate them, because then they don't have an excuse or justification for their being angry at you. And you'll drive them crazy. You'll heap burning coals upon their heads. And when you see them, you can smile. You know how when you're in kind of tense situations where there's a strained relationship, when you encounter that person, you kind of feel the tension. It's awkward. And, you have a hard time smiling and being pleasant and nice. But if you're doing what Paul says and being kind to them and loving them, and you're heaping burning coals on their head, you can smile big when you see them, because here's the opportunity to do something nice to them and drive them crazy. Yes. Well, you are, but it's better to do the right thing for the wrong reason than to do a bad thing for the right reason. Well, I've got bad thoughts, but what usually happens is this enables a calming so that the relationship isn't destroyed and pulled apart and ruined. Yes. But if you win them over, it's because I'm a sinful person that I can't do it purely on the righteous reasons. I can't really get there by myself. But God helps me, and Paul helps. I mean, it's scriptural. It's scriptural. Okay. Well, I'll work on it. Right. It's. Oh, well, if I'm laughing and I'm happy, that's a wicked laugh. Okay. Well, anyway, it's a method for overcoming the worst in ourselves, but it's not achieving the best. It's on the way. The first part is to, truly be able to forgive them and not let it bother us at all. That's the goal. And we'll get there someday. But frankly, I don't have any of those people in my life right now. Everything's good. No, I really haven't been running into any of them. But don't make me stop and think, or I'll start remembering some, and then I'll have to do something about that. Anyway, let's see. Oh, there's another thing about the human freedom of choice is still present for Cain. And God tries to warn him and offer guidance, but God does not intervene to stop the act. God does not force us to be good. Now, at the early part, Cain is not rejected as a person, although his gift was not accepted. Now, in a lot of real-life situations, every student does not receive an A+, so that no one gets his or her feelings hurt. Sometimes the slower, more needy student might get more love and care and attention because they have a greater need. And sometimes the A+ student might not even need a teacher because often they're bright enough to get it on their own. So a correction, when we're corrected, we're told to work or make an effort stronger to overcome something that was unacceptable. It's saying, you can do better. So the correction isn't always meant to be a put down or a condemnation, but rather it's a word of encouragement. You can do better. So do better. Let's work on doing better. So God is still engaged in working with Cain, trying to help him do better. But he seems to have such a twisted nature that he doesn't even listen, and he just immediately goes out and does his dastardly deed. He is given in. So another aspect of this, and it's we're not real sure, but Cain illustrates a factor that we see sometimes in people. Their whole happiness and sense of self-worth is so connected to what other people think that they really don't have a healthy self-image, that they cannot go to some objective criteria in order to do a self-evaluation, that their whole sense of self-worth, is so dependent on what other people think. And adolescents are so caught up in this of, being accepted and a part of the crowd. And a lot of that has nothing to do with good objective criteria. Sometimes someone is rejected because they're better than the ones rejecting. It's a jealousy. A new kid comes to town and they're really bright and attractive and talented, and that becomes a threat to the established pecking order because they want that person down on the bottom, but that person could easily step right in and be very popular and be the leader and be great in the classroom, on the athletic field, or head cheerleader or whatever. But the rejection is not based on objective criteria. So anyway, but Cain seems to be one that he just controlled. His whole sense of being and purpose in life is from outside of himself. It's based upon what someone else thinks. And so we capture that personality type in this story if we read it psychologically. Okay. Another part of the commentaries will tell us is the story doesn't tell us how Cain and Abel became aware of God's acceptance or rejection of their offerings. It just states that they were. It doesn't say who told them or how. God didn't. There's no dialogue there. Nahum Sarna, the Hebrew Old Testament scholar, says the story must have had an independent origin, for it assumes culture and society and populations and so forth. But he points out the willingness to worship and sacrifice, to offer gifts to God, is a spontaneous expression of religious devotion. And he says it's making an assumption that this is an innate, a natural, almost instinctual human quality from the get-go. Saying, here it is, there's no order, there's no rule they're trying to follow, it's just spontaneous. Now, whether that's right or wrong, that's the way he's reading it. And but he also lifts up the possibility that within that there's a little bit of human nature going on. And he picks up on the Cain giving some of the crop and Abel giving the best, that there's already a quality of heart, of inner being. Abel is more fully connected and noble of heart, and Cain is lesser. And then he's saying these concepts of religion in Israel that are illustrated here is, one, is the individual is the ultimate religious unit. Conscious personality is distinct within the community. He says it's kind of like, well, he doesn't say it, but I thought of the difference between beef stew. You have beef stew, you got a little piece of celery and carrot and potato and beef and maybe a little tomato. What else you put in there? Green beans, peas, onion. Anybody writing this recipe down? But that's different than just a drop of water in a bucket or a drop of water in the ocean. The individual drop loses its unique identity. But in the beef stew, each thing has an identity. And he's saying it's that way. The individual still is a part of the community and the whole, but the individual keeps this uniqueness and responsibility and accountability for his or her own efforts, but affects the whole, has influence on the whole. And he says this is a basic concept and understanding of the Hebrew religion. Now this going, and then the other part is relating worship to personal piety. Social morality is a foreshadowing of what the prophets will be telling us, saying that God does not accept the burnt offerings of those who lie and cheat and steal and do not care for the orphan and the widow in the land. So worship and morality and everyday life are connected. And so, boom, right here in the very beginning, we have that. He's offering this gift, but there's something not right in his heart. And then his behavior, even though he's gone to church on Sunday, out Monday morning, he's out there doing bad stuff, and it's wrong. So, anyway. So, here's another question that's raised. Was the homicide premeditated? It seems like it when he says, let's go out into the field. That's kind of let's go away where we're anonymous and nobody's watching and nobody can see what I'm planning. Now, if it's just, a spontaneous thing that happens, why do you think let's go apart? But there's really not enough in the story to, maybe let's go out and play, and while they're playing, he gets mad and hits him with a baseball bat. I mean, we don't have enough detail, and that's one of the great things of this story and the Genesis story is it leaves so much room for us to read into it our own experiences and come back with something that may speak to us. It may not be what the Yahwist intended, but sometimes it's a message that we need to hear, and that's why it stimulated that. But anyway, Sarna argues that it's not premeditated because there's no premeditated plan that's described. And since it's so early in the stories, he's mentioning nobody's died yet. Cain couldn't have decided to go out and kill his brother because he doesn't know what it takes to kill somebody. Nobody's died yet. Nobody's gotten killed yet. It's still in that early time. He hasn't experienced what kind of a blow will actually kill his brother. I mean, with, little kids slapping each other and hitting each other, they don't know how bad it's going to hurt. I mean, if it draws blood, they might... But we don't know. It's just a reaction or a response. Anyway, that's Nahum Sarna's take on it. So in that case, it would simply be manslaughter. I wanted to hurt him, but I didn't mean to kill him, kind of thought. But Cain did intend harm, but maybe not lethal harm. But then we get to the blood crying out. And one of the things here is the blood and the breath are gifts of God, and that God owns them and claims them, as it were. And the Hebrew people understood that blood means life, and if God gives life, then the blood that has been spilled is crying out. And the cry, you cry with breath to make the noise. So the blood is crying out. That spirit that makes one a human being also comes from God. So to kill is an assault on God and on God's will and God's authority. So we have the sanctity of human life is being destroyed here. And so if the sin is against God, then why is Cain banished from society? That's true. Particularly mobile and nomadic peoples don't have a prison. They can't lock someone up in prison. Oh, they haven't had the law yet. Correct. Well, we don't know what was in his head. He didn't say he had a right, but anyway, we assume that he was justified in his action. Yeah. Well, we're assuming he buried him, but we don't know that he buried him. He just left him out there. But we assume that he buried him. He may have buried him. If which is true? Right. What right does any human being have? Well, that's one of the conclusions in this. And then another one is the question of capital punishment by the state. Because the state executes people on our behalf. We're the citizens who are the state. And there's a good argument against that, in that we say we kill people in order to teach people that it's not right to kill people. I mean, it doesn't make sense. And then the other way of spinning that is, if the state can say that there are cases in which it is justified to take another human life, then the state sets the example that, well, if I can come up with a good reason, then it is justified. I can be justified to kill somebody else if the state